Hossein, how can we think about universalism, the commonality of religion, and at the same time, particularism, the differences which we have to admit are real between religions?
Let me just say briefly that we human beings, whether we are religious or irreligious, philosophers or non-philosophers, when we come back to our own manner of thinking, we are immediately confronted by the fact that there are two poles that determine the way we think. One is, in a sense, universalism, one is particularism, except we don't think about it philosophically. For example, you think of a triangle. A triangle is a triangle. It's a universal mathematical concept. But you never see a triangle. You say this triangle. You're playing pool, and there is that triangular figure you put the balls in. And that's particular triangle. And so our experience oscillates, both mentally and outwardly, between what you call the universal and the particular in the philosophical sense. But to come to the religious and philosophical sense of these terms, these are extremely important as keys for the understanding of both religion and traditional philosophies. Let me start with religion. There's no doubt, especially from the point of the perennial philosophy, which is a way of looking at things which I follow. I'm, in a sense, both a perennialist and an Islamic philosopher. You see incredible universal characteristics which manifest themselves in all the religions, like that triangle or circle that we think about geometrically and mathematically. On both the level of ethics and of metaphysics, not only metaphysics, but also ethics. For example, do unto others as others would have to do unto you, or some formula similar to it, is different from specific moral action in different religions. But it's a spiritual moral quality that is universal, as we find everywhere. So everywhere, whether within Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, wherever you are, in a sense you have a particularity of that universal principle. On the metaphysical level, it's even more evident. And this is where the perennial philosophy makes a great deal of emphasis, namely that at the heart of every religion, and all the great traditional philosophies that have come down to us, from Parmenides and Pythagoras and Plato, I don't mean the late Greek schools which turned away from that, I mean the early up to Aristotle. There is at the heart of these different philosophies a universal perspective on the nature of reality. That first of all, reality is not exhausted by the physical world in which we live. This reality has a transcendent and immanent aspect to it. And between us and that reality, which is boundless and without finitude, that is infinite and absolute, there are levels of reality which separate us, and so forth and so on. They have remarkable universality. Even Buddhism, that speaks only about samsara and nirvana, once it developed later on as all these intermediate worlds, which is in Tibetan Buddhism, and of course Mahayana, other forms of Northern Buddhism. So you have on the metaphysical level, a remarkable universality. But at the same time, one of the very important characteristics of the perennial philosophy, in contrast to a lot of pseudo-perennial philosophy, a kind of sentimental, let's all get togetherness that we have around, in the world around us, which is all right for itself, but that's not real philosophy. The perennial philosophy, there's also particularity. In fact, those universal truths could not have manifested themselves in this world without particularity. In the same way that triangle manifests itself in our life by some triangular thing, object, wood or iron that we pick up, and there it is triangular. And that's why perennial philosophy also respects particularity within each religion and considers it to be very important, because there is no path to either truth or the truth without being a path.
Doesn't perennial philosophy, though, have a problem with modern science and even modern schools of philosophy that seek to demystify and show the supernatural may not be real? And isn't there conflict between modern science and perennial philosophy?
Yes, there is. It did not have to be so. Two of the greatest founders of modern science, Kepler and Newton, were really perennialists, in the sense that they breathe in that world of the perennial philosophy. Whether you look at the commentary in the book of Daniel of Newton or the harmony of the world of Kepler, you realize what I'm saying. But what happened is that as 17th century science developed, gradually forgot that it was a science of nature and claimed for itself to be the science of nature. And therefore, all levels of reality with which the science did not deal were very rapidly relegated to irreality, to the domain of irreality.
Because empirically they couldn't
exactly
find it, see it, experiment
exactly.
with it.
You have this famous example given by Sir Arthur Eddington, the famous astrophysicist, British astrophysicist. He said, it's like putting on green glasses and saying that everything is green. You forget that you put on the green glasses to start with. That is, Galileo, by distinguishing between the primary and secondary qualities in the discourse and dialogue, and saying that the role of science to discuss only what he called the primary qualities, which are pure quantity, and everything else is non-scientific, he already defined the kind of science which is by definition exclusive of what is not empirical. And even the empirical is limited to a particular kind of empirical. For example, the mystics of the world throughout, like yogis, for example, the inner being is a kind of laboratory, and they empirically try to experience other levels of reality, other levels of consciousness. And it can be done through practice. It can be done. Modern science was not even interested in that. It wanted to go into an external laboratory and do experiments which are always controlled. That is, man controls the experiment.
So they'd be repeatable.
So they're repeatable, but also excludes all that which we cannot control. So by definition excludes things which are beyond our common ordinary faculties. Now, had modern science not claimed for itself this exclusivity, and had not Western philosophy surrendered itself to the science and preserved its independence and preserved their authentic metaphysics, the perennial philosophy would not be against modern science. Perennial philosophy is not against what modern science is, but against what modern science is not, and many of its practitioners claim for it to be.
All right, let's now go to Islamic philosophy and understand the universal aspects of it, but also the particular aspects.
Well, first of all, let me say something about the particular aspect of religion before I get to Islamic philosophy. For example, Islam has remarkable universal characteristics which it shares, let's say, with Christianity and Judaism. But at the same time, it has its own particularity. For example, the adamant refusal to distinguish between the kingdom of Caesar and the kingdom of God. That's one example of it. That is, even the word secularism doesn't exist in Arabic and Persian. And the way now we are not trying to force this separation upon Middle Eastern countries is never going to work, because it doesn't go with how they understand God and themselves and the role of religion in life and everything else, and human rights even. So it has a lot of practical aspect to it and many other particularities. And also Judaism has its own particularities, and Christianity and so forth. And that's the beauty of these religions. A rose has its own particularity. It smells sweet like a jasmine, but it's a different kind of flower. Now, to come to Islamic philosophy is one of the major philosophical traditions of the world. Unfortunately, it's not well known in the West, precisely because it had so much influence on the West for a few centuries. You cannot think of medieval Western philosophy without Islamic philosophy. It just would not have existed. And Jewish philosophy played a very important role, a bridge in Spain. Maimonides, people like that who wrote in Arabic themselves, and other figures, Halevi and so forth. This philosophy, however, stopped influencing Western philosophy when that unity of Spain, of the Jewish, Christian, Islamic community was destroyed with the conquest of Islamic Spain from the north, and this transmission came to an end. And precisely because there had been so much influence, Western thought there was nothing afterwards. Today, there's a lot more interest in Taoist philosophy than there is in Islamic philosophy or Buddhist philosophy, which are much farther away. One of my goals in life has been to resuscitate Islamic philosophy, not as a chapter in Western philosophy, like Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. You open up, and there's a 30-page chapter called Arabic philosophy, something like that, but as an independent philosophical school itself. And that has, again, both its universality and particularity. As certain features very similar to the mainstream of Jewish and Christian philosophy in the West, especially pre-modern, because it is based on interest in ontology, on the primacy of the real with a capital R, on epistemology, which is not simply empirical, on the functioning of the intellect within us as well as reason, which is only, in a sense, a reflection of the intellect upon the mirror of the mind, and many, many other issues. It also shares certain very important elements with what is east of it, that is with the Hindu and Buddhist world. And at the same time has this unique feature of its own. It is what in my most recent book I've called prophetic philosophy, because it's philosophizing in a universe in which prophecy has a reality, is real.
And a continuing reality.
A continuing reality. And usually today in the world, even those of us who accept prophecy, we only associate it with ethics, not with knowledge. See, in the modern West, we've come to limit serious knowledge to what modern science can teach us. Others, things are poetry, dreams, this kind of thing. We don't take it seriously as knowledge. Whereas in this Islamic philosophical world, prophecy is not only a source of ethics, but a source of supernal knowledge.
By saying prophecy, you in essence mean revelation, the revelation of a supernatural to the natural.
Exactly, not foretelling what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right. And so how do you then see the total picture of perennial philosophy, Islamic philosophy, as both a universal and a particular?
First of all, we live in a world today in which, whether we like it or not, awareness of other worldviews, other religions, other cultures has become a necessity for many people in the world, except in villages or people are living on top of mountains. But it's certainly in the urban environments of the world, whether you're in Tokyo or New York and everything in between. And therefore, perennial philosophy has a very important role to play in revealing both the universality of religious truth and the particularity of religion in different climes with which Western men or Eastern men come in contact today. And therefore, I think it will play a very important role, not only in pure philosophy, but even on a practical level. As for Islamic philosophy, in a sense, Islamic philosophy is one of the grand schools of perennial philosophy. You cannot say that about the Vienna Circle or Sartrean existentialism. But Islamic philosophy, like traditional Christian Jewish philosophy, like Hindu philosophy, the darshans, and so forth, is one of the great schools of perennial philosophy, and it itself, in a sense, is both universal, the aspects of it which reconfirm the perennial philosophy, and as particularities which pertain to the Islamic world where it has grown and manifested itself.